It's wonderful to be here amongst old friends and to be meeting new friends. I must say it's a great privilege to be here at a CCS conference, the Centre for Civil Society. I've known probably since January 2001, where I was invited to a conference there. And I've known them grow and excel over those years. And I just would like to say that although in the 11 years since I've known them, I very definitely feel 11 years older. Whenever I meet Path or Bhuvani or Sujata, who I first met then, they just seem to get younger and younger by the day. And whatever it is you're doing in that organization, keep up. But seriously, Path, you've got a really well-respected organization around the world here, and it's it's a great honor to be present here. Now, I have this role of the neutral chairman today about an issue that I actually don't feel neutral about at all. And so perhaps you'll just forgive me if I indulge, before I put on my neutral chairman's hat, can I just indulge myself for 1 minute about the issues? As Sujata mentioned, I'm involved with Mohammed Anwar here, running a chain of schools in Hyderabad, in poor areas of Hyderabad in India. I'm also involved with a local entrepreneur called Ken Donko in Ghana, running a chain of schools there. And it is so much easier running the chain of schools in Ghana than it is here. Partly for some of the things that Mr. Modi was talking about earlier in terms of the profit versus non-profit, the whole understanding of what structures you're allowed. It was so much easier getting investment in Ghana than it was here. And now, of course, the Right to Education Act makes it even harder, potentially, to move forward. And so my concern, which I shall just finish with this, is supposing, no one knows how many there are, but supposing there are 2 lakh low-cost private schools in India that will be unrecognized under the Act. And maybe there are 300 students in each, who knows? So you've got 6 crores of children whose parents have chosen a low-cost private school above a government school because they perhaps, intuitively knowing the evidence that Professor Kingdon has given us this morning, prefer the private school to the government school. For all its faults, the private school is better. Where will they go? Where will they go if the governments of the states of India want to close down these schools? That is my concern. Now I'm going to put my neutral chairman's hat on, and I'm going to be scrupulously neutral from now on, I hope. So my first speaker is Sudha Mankad, who is our, if I may say so, our Bara Babu on the panel this morning. He is he's had roles of leadership in central government, in agricultural, finance, and human resource development before moving on to become Chief Secretary to the government of Gujarat, where I believe and understand he was involved in the committees looking at how to implement RTE. So he's a deeply respected figure. It's a great honor to welcome you here this morning, and please come to the panel. I will introduce everyone onto the panel, and then we'll do our speeches. Then we have Sem Haukip, who, now I've always been fascinated by the northeast of India. I have a tenuous connection to the northeast. My great aunt was an assistant to an American missionary society in Nagaland and Manipur back in the 1930s. And I've always been fascinated. I've never been, but it's great to welcome you to the panel. And you were telling me earlier that you're running 3 low-cost private schools for conflict-affected youth. And that's something I'm fascinated to hear about. And you're now the Chief Executive Officer of the Society for the Promotion of Tribal Welfare and Development. And it's in that role we welcome you to the panel. Please take your seat. And then finally, Michael Latham. I've known Michael Latham, I don't know how many years. He does seem older, to be fair, as I do. Michael, the president, we used to call you, of CFBT America at one stage and now living in Hyderabad, working on various projects with CFBT. CFBT funded my very first bit of research into low-cost private schools. So I'm always deeply indebted to CFBT, and Michael was my mentor on that work. So Michael, please come to the panel. If I may, the order of speeches today will be just one different from what you've got in your books. We'll start with the Sudha Mankad, then Michael Latham, and then finish on Sem. So please, may I invite Sudhir to present for his 15 minutes. Thank you.
I think the impression some of you might have got by the introduction which Peter gave was that I worked in agriculture, finance, and lots of areas not connected with education. But at the end of the day, I have been a hardcore education administrator and therefore responsible for the good as well as the bad which is in the system. I worked as Director Education, then Education Secretary in the state government and Government of India. I've also been the founder of Pratham in Gujarat, Pratham Gujarat, and continue to work with Pratham as well as Gyanshala, and I'll have something to say about what Peter just mentioned about low-cost schools. Last year, I retired from service nearly 5 years ago. Last year, the state government invited me to chair a committee to rewrite the Gujarat Primary Education Act of 1947 and the Gujarat Primary Education Rules of 1949. In consonance with the Right to Education Act of Government of India and the draft model rules which Government of India had circulated. We had educationists, we had people from non-government organizations, we had a multidisciplinary group which worked on this assignment. We worked for nearly 8 months on this, and at the beginning of this year we have given the draft act as well as the rules to the state government. Now the topic given to me today is about the RTE rules. Before we came here, Peter asked me, are you going to defend RTE, are you going to oppose it? Neither. I am also neutral. As a civil servant, I am given a job. And my job is to see that it gets done with the least amount of pain and complications. And that has really been the effort of our committee in preparing these rules. That we have tried to take out some of the things, the wrong things which could have happened as a part of implementation of this act and rules, and try to build correctives which take away some of those negatives from the system. Now it's very interesting that the act covers children from the age of 6 to 14. And this is right from the days of directive principles of our constitution. We found that, at least in Gujarat, admissions start at the age of 5. And that has been happening for the last 40 years. When we started collecting evidence, we realized that in many states, admissions actually start at the age of 5. If an unaided school admits a child of 5 years, some auditor can say, look, you will not get your reimbursement from the state government because you are violating the law. We had endless debates. When there are educationists, they disagree on everything. Whether children should be admitted at the age of 5 or at the age of 6. But without going into it, and the act is a given thing, the act says 6. We have just added a rule that where if the parents are willing to admit their children at the age of 5, that shall be permitted. It's a simple solution. I don't know how exactly legal it is, but it takes care of the problem. Otherwise, what would happen is that children who are admitted at the age of 5, say May 2011, they will go next year to class 1, class 2, they'll be 6 years old. We'll have no children to admit in class 1 next year. And every year this will be repeated. So this was a major administrative problem which we have tried to resolve in the rules. The second concern came out of all the provisions regarding recognition of unaided schools. The law provides that the school has to have certain physical infrastructure, certain academic infrastructure. If they are not able to do this, they get 3 years to do it, and if they don't do it, they get derecognized. Now this would create a very serious problem in our education system, because a large number of our schools, assuming that they make all efforts to provide this infrastructure, will not be able to do so. You go to the old city of Ahmedabad, you go to old Delhi, you go to old Lucknow, you go to any old town in this country, there are schools which will not be able to provide the physical infrastructure because they operate from buildings where you just cannot expand. Now, are you going to derecognize and close all the schools? The Act says that yes, you do that. So what we have suggested is that where a school cannot comply with the requirement of the law to provide the physical infrastructure, but is providing good education, which could be tested, and Sridhar is here, he'll be talking more about it later, which could be tested through a well laid out procedure for measuring educational outcomes, then the state government can allow those schools to continue. Recognition also means that somebody has to go. Somebody means somebody from the department which I headed for many years, to go and see, physically inspect and see whether whatever they have said, they have classrooms, they have library, they have laboratory, is all correct. Now this can become a major source of corruption in the system. Even today, all the schools which exist today without the necessary infrastructure, and this is across the country, have been recognized by the district primary education officer or the district education officer or somebody. And yet they don't have any facilities which the Act envisages it should have. Inspection will have to be done. So what we have suggested is that these inspections should be done by either retired awardee teachers or retired principals, lecturers, people from the civil society. And we have proposed that every district should have 30 to 40 such groups, which can go around, verify, and give an independent assessment whether the schools comply with the requirement of the Act. It is not going to remove all the irregularities, but we feel that it will certainly reduce the incidence of irregularities in granting recognition. Similarly, when a notice for derecognition is given, we have proposed that there should be such independent committees whose report must be taken into account before the Director of Education takes a decision to derecognize a school, because that is the ultimate penalty, derecognizing a school. Let me now come to the most controversial provisions of the Right to Education Act, which is regarding 25% admission in unaided schools. We went around the state, we talked to hundreds of school managements, teachers, students, and a few facts emerged which are, I think, quite startling. See, when we think of unaided private schools, we always somehow think of the elitist schools, the Delhi public school or the modern school or the Rishi Valley, schools like that. Ahmedabad has about 500 unaided schools. of which only 10% would be coming in this category. To our great surprise, we found that yes, these schools were quite unwilling to comply with this provision. But the remaining schools, the remaining 450, were quite happy to do it. And that really set the alarm bells ringing that why are they so keen to do it? And here comes somebody talked about financial viability, the economics of the whole system. We did a quick study and we found that because the schools are to be reimbursed, the amount of money government spends on each student in its school. Roughly we found that, say in the city of Ahmedabad, the cost per child for government was around rupees 700 to 800 rupees per child per month. The majority of schools are actually charging fees less than 700 rupees per month. Some as low as 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees. The second thing we found was that with reservation now touching more than 50%, a large number of these schools already had more than 50% students who come within the category of disadvantaged group. So here is a situation where today these children are paying whatever fees they are paying, 100, 200, 300, will now be entitled to get the schools will be entitled to get full reimbursement for these children. So what will happen? They'll gradually raise the fees. If government is paying 700 rupees, why should I not charge 700 rupees? Number two, children who are today paying themselves, the government will have to share the additional burden of paying education for those children also. The third aspect was, of course, that how do you implement this? You have to go to SC certificate, ST certificate, OBC certificate. A whole lot of procedures are involved, which again can cause corruption and malpractices. So finally, we came up with a solution. It was actually suggested by an NGO, and we also drew upon what Parth has been working on, the voucher system. And what we have said is that till the system stabilizes, at least the next 3 to 5 years, frankly, governments are reluctant, the elitist schools are reluctant, nobody is keen to implement this section. The state finance departments are reluctant because there is a lot of additional burden. So what we have said is that for the first few years, let the system be run by the DEO or the district primary education officer. First, we must give wide publicity that this kind of a facility exists. After that, if a parent wants to admit his child to one of these private schools, let him get himself registered with the school, with the government authorities, show his SC, ST, income card, whatever is necessary. And the DEO or the DPO, after verifying the facts, will give him a school card, which he can take to the neighborhood school, and after that the school shall not ask any questions, and he'll be admitted, and the school will be reimbursed by government at the prescribed rate. So this is the system we have incorporated in the rules. We hope that this has a much better possibility of working than completely throwing up the system, to everyone. Because earlier the stand was, oh, this is the responsibility of the unaided schools, let them work out their own procedures for admitting these children. It will not happen that way. It may happen in a few cases here and there. But in a large system, I think in the earlier years, we'll have to keep some kind of a control. Otherwise, the system may get out of hand. And the intention, good or bad, whatever the intention behind this law, will get completely defeated. The only solution we have not been able to find is the problem which Peter raised. I work with Gyanshala. We run 300 schools in the slums of Ahmedabad city. We charge 30 rupees, 40 rupees, maximum 50 rupees as fees. The school runs for only 3 hours. Such schools will never get recognized under the RTE law. They serve a very useful purpose. I know, although I have been in the system, that where there is a municipal school in the neighborhood, parents still prefer to send their children to Gyanshala than to the municipal school. In fact, it's a sad commentary that only those who cannot afford to send their kids to a private school. He has done a survey in Tamil Nadu, I can say it without doing a survey. Only those who cannot afford to send their kids to a private school ultimately go to a panchayat or a municipal school. That is the ground reality. So what are we going to gain if we close down such schools? My only answer to Gyanshala is stop calling yourself a school. You are a coaching class, you are a tuition class, call yourself anything but a school. Then legally you don't come under the definition of a school. But some DEO can still, decide to take action against you, so you will always run that danger. I hope that as the Act gets amended someday, a provision will be made to allow such schools also to function as part of our system. So this is the time to think of the future and try to build in some of those things which you think the law will need to take care in the times to come. And we have tried to build many such things, particularly about academic standards, about learning outcomes, about teacher training, as a part of the framework of rules and the law, so that it cannot be neglected in future. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm agnostic with regards to public or private. I'd like to say I'm a practitioner rather than an academic. I worked with James and Anwar in the private schools of Hyderabad, and I've also been a shop steward of the British Columbia Government Employees Union when I was a college lecturer. So I try and understand both sides as best I can. What I want to do now, very quickly, is take you through what I think is a PPP that we don't talk about, and it's to do with civil society. There was recently an article, think tank, Education Foundation, brought out a report in Britain on the future of education in Britain. And it got me thinking about, what do I think about the future of education, and how do I see school management committees? Why am I so keen on supporting management committees? So what I want to take you through, first of all, is just very quickly what I see you have to think about the future, and then the present, and then give you an example of what we've been doing in Andhra Pradesh over the last couple of years. Today's learners will have between them 10 to 14 jobs by the time they're 38. My children already have had more jobs than I've had in my life. 1 out of 4 workers employed today is working for a company for which they've been working for less than a year. We don't know, the top 10 jobs that are in demand today did not exist in 2004. It was in the Mint newspaper today they were talking about this very subject. We're preparing children for jobs that don't even exist yet, and jobs that require the use of technologies that don't even exist yet. We're asking students and the children of the learners of the future, there's billions of Google searches daily. What did we do before? There are 5 times more words in the English language now than there were in Shakespeare's time. And you access a week's worth of news, more information now you can get than you would come across in a lifetime in the 18th century. The amount of technical information is doubling every year. So, half of what a 4-year college graduate student learns will be outdated by the time they finish a 4-year degree. And by 2028, when the first grader will be just 23 and beginning their career, there are predictions that there's a supercomputer that will have been built that exceeds the computer capabilities of the human brain. So let's start thinking the future, folks. Let's stop thinking the past. So we've been through, as I'd argue, a succession of school improvement strategies. And while the overall level of performance or access appear to rise or drop, the very high level of inequity in performance persists, and the degrees of quality and access still vary tremendously. We continue to allow the curriculum at school level to be shaped by teachers who are themselves the product of a particular type of curriculum and way of learning, and we go on repeating that prescription even though the evidence is pretty clear that it does not appeal to or excite a considerable number of young people, particularly males in secondary education. They're dropping out the system left, right, and center. I have when I get really going, I said, if planes fell out of the sky as often as kids fall out of the educational system, we'd fix them. We fix planes, we don't fix education systems. So there's a silent, I believe there's an Arab Spring, there's a silent revolution going on that we're tending to miss. So if I'm writing for this education report, the description of education for me is to provide children with the skills to earn their living, an interest to enjoy their leisure, and the morality to be a good world citizen. And we continue to come up with the same old education cliches, such as look at the teacher, look at the headmaster is the crux to the solution. They're no longer tenable. We've got to think out of the box. So we need thinkers who can act, practitioners who can think, and we need a balance between curriculum delivery and learner choice. We need a system that allows the freedom for people to make their own choices, that still showcases best practice, but balances the assessment mechanism right by ensuring that the assessment approaches are fit for purpose. Go back to my aeroplane analogy. We can fly from London to Sydney. The pilot, he just said you're all sitting comfortably, and he then goes to sleep. The person who's most important to us all are the air traffic controllers. They're the ones who are guiding that plane. You just want someone at the front of the plane saying, please fasten your seatbelts. So what are the 4 key overarching changes that are coming, or that I believe are necessary? Well, first of all, as I've said, we need to stop looking back, and we need to start thinking the future. Secondly, we need to provide schools that are for the beneficiaries. We're starting to talk about the clients who are the parents, but we're still not asking the kids. Education is still in the dinosaur age, where we don't ask the customer, what would you like? Did we do it well? How could we do it better? Thirdly, we need to prepare young people for a global society. The problems they're facing are global. Wherever I go, be it in Malaysia, the States, Canada, I'll ask, what's the capital of Bhutan? What's the capital of Canada? And the knowledge, world knowledge, is ghastly. We need people to think beyond their own national boundaries. And finally, we need to engage elected politicians, the previous speaker, people I call the treacle people, to cease their perpetual habit of blocking decisions they do not like, and to engage in supporting measures that tackle some very pressing challenges. So what are the 5 key driving forces that I think are going to take us to these four points? Well, first of all, it's going to be, and you've read about it many times, a teacher-centric to a learner-centric. Emphasis on the teacher as the sage on the stage is going to be replaced by guide on the side. The teacher is the control valve, teaching in time-dependent, location-dependent environment. There are just these forces that are coming that can't be stopped by the educational system, that there's an exponential growth in information that's uncontrollable. So that's my force number 1. My force number 2, classroom-bound to unbound. The information is exploding in all forms everywhere, and this is being harnessed into courseware. But there's still a vast vacuum and room for the arrival of participative courseware. My third one is mandated to individualize learning. There's the quote I've got there, that's from the Khan Academy website. So now it's going to be, you're going to be able to fly your plane. So back to my plane analogy, you can fly peasant class, you can fly business class, but I'll take you to the same destination. But how you get there and how you choose to get there is going to be far more dependent upon what you choose. You are going to be, the learner is going to be able to produce their own learning and their own means of learning in a far more creative way than we do right now. And my last one, which takes me to my SMCs, the key driving force is long to short-term accountability relationships. Now, let me explain. To improve school systems, as Dr. Gita said, we've traditionally used, we do teacher training, curriculum reform, textbook provision, infrastructure, midday meals, and we haven't moved the boat out at all. Whereas what is needed going forward is to strengthen the accountability through information for accountability, school-based management, and teacher incentives based on performance. Those are the three areas where we're going to change compared to the old 5. And for that, we need, one of the first ones is we need to get more parent-client engagement, because parents are ambitious for their kids, get involved in their learning. And we must go beyond just empowering the consumer, the client, but also the beneficiary. And how we manage this change doesn't mean more choice-based reform. It means, I would argue, it means voice-based reform. So, summarizing, teacher-centric, learner-centric, classroom-based anywhere, anytime, mandated courses to individualize learning, learners as producers, courseware explosion, and client power as customers of education services. So what are the challenges and aspirations, and giving a brief example. Challenges to SMCs. Well, SMCs, and I've been working in Andhra now for the last 2 years with 400 of them, what powers are needed for them to really be able to increase accountability over government schools? You need teacher competencies and student learning, and members of SMCs are poor, and the educationists they are making accountable are often far, far wealthier than they. So finally, how does one embed any SMC training over the long term? The challenge, I've got a quote there that you can read and from the president of the Teachers Union, and then one from PATH. I believe we have to take on those challenges. And aspirations, well, SMC should focus on tracking each child, and they should act as implementing an apex planning body to oversee children's welfare and rights, not just to education, but to health, water, sanitation. There need to be meetings conducted on a regular basis. They need to include participation of children, not just funding and expenditure. We need to get people involved, be it in collegiatas or other means, and they need to have school development plans, which even in a private school are hard to develop, let alone imagine a poor little public primary school in a rural community. How the heck do they make a school development plan without help? So we need to help them. And we need to be, and one of the difficulties I find with my treacle people in Andhra is the people we're trying to hold accountable are people who are outsourcing the PPP to give the assistance to the schools that are going to then hold them accountable. And this project I've been doing now, I've waited 6 months to be paid, the contract I've already had, and I've been waiting 3 months for the funds to be given for this current year. Although it's a PPP I'm helping, but it's the treacle people. So let me just share very briefly in my last 2 minutes the project we've been doing. We started with 6 mandals or blocks in Anantapur. We were funded by DFID to look at 100 primary schools. And what we did, we were then, with the work we did, the government came and gave us 400 schools, and my team are in with the SPD today, and I hope we're going to get 1,200 schools. And what we do is we set up an instrument where we've been training the self-help group women and the village activists on how to use a very simple school quality assessment card. And as you see there, it's got traffic light systems and it's pictorial, because they're illiterate, so how do they know how to measure what's going on in the school? So we've got certain, the toilets working, student and teacher attendance, basic things that the women can measure. Okay, so that's my instrument. The second one is the means. I started with 100 schools. I could send my village activists in there. But now I've gone to 400, and they're about to give me 1,200 schools. How do I get that information? How do I collate it, analyze it, and most critically, give it back to them? Because if I don't give the information back to them, it's worthless. So what we've done is we've designed a system using SMS, where the women take the survey from the school scorecard, and under the 10 indicators, SMS into my customized server in the office, the data vis-a-vis midday meal, school teacher attendance, and at any time, I can press a button and give the administrators, the treacle people, their data vis-a-vis attendance, at the school level, at the block level, and at the district level. It's cheap. I give the women. So you are the esteemed mobile phone lady in the SMC community. Your job is randomly, twice a month, to go and conduct an assessment of the school and then send the data to us. So my final thoughts. SMCs are a critical PPP in this they provide a vital way for enabling disadvantaged groups to hold their professionals to account, be it education, be it politics. SMCs, though, are merely the forum or a conduit. We've seen VECs, we've seen other forms of committees. You need to give them tools, very rudimentary, simple tools. You need to give them the means, and you need evidence of impact of the work of these SMCs. Thank you very much.
I will be speaking on private schools, budget schools, how they aid access to quality education by the poor people. To start with, my education on legal issues about RTE started with CCS last month. Before that, my attitude toward this very important RTE Act was that if the schools, the budget schools, whoever runs in rural areas or in urban slums are closed, the government will be held accountable by the next generation who are denied of their rights to education by their own very government. And today I have a senior bureaucrat, Mr. Sudhil, who had walked through this complicated act, sharing with us, and I was very happy to hear from him. I will be speaking on my experiences, very little experience. I am a little bit intimidated by seeing the audience, such a large audience, and also huge experience in the education sectors. As a grassroots practitioner, I will be heavily biased towards the poor people and also towards the tribals. Let me give you a scenario of the education progress among the tribal peoples so far. In 1961, from 1961 till 1991, the literacy rate among tribal people increased from 8.53% to 47% in 2001, compared to 28% and 64% for the general population during this period. If you look at in this figure, the literacy rate among the the tribals in 2001 was 34%. Looking at the population at 8.2% of the population, the tribals, the literacy rate among the tribal women is very, very minimal, 34%, which means nearly 5 to 6 women out of 10 are still illiterate. And the dropout rate in the primary level and middle and secondary level remains as high as more than 15% in the tribal areas. Also, what is really disturbing to me is the participation of this community, the disadvantaged groups in the higher education. If you look at the participation of tribals in higher education is just 3.9 in 1991 data. Just 3.9 out of 8.2 population. And breaking that 3.9 is, 0.8% is at the, if you break that into subject-wise, 8% is arts, and 3.4 is science, BSc science, and 1.5 is BCom. that is the status in the higher level education. I think this may be this may also hold true in a number of disadvantaged communities, which I don't have the data. Now, coming to the our experience, my motivation, my interest in the education started during the last in 2003, when I get a wide intensive exposure in Dan district in Gujarat, sir, and also in Dantewara area in Jagdalpur, and Sahibganj in Jharkhand, and Dipu area in Assam. Now, what I see in these areas is, if I am from a tribal community from Manipur. We are fortunate to have a very good education from the mission schools, which Professor Toli was talking about. The mission schools have done excellently well in the Northeast. And when I go to these areas, many of the communities, they don't have access to education. Large number of students were out of education. Now, eventually, even if they attend government schools, what happens is, at the end of the day, they have to compete with their counterparts who are studying in private, very, very good schools here in public schools in Delhi for a job, for a good job. So they cannot compete with the best of the students who are studying in the best schools, even if they have lots of even if they come from the reservation category, so they are not able to compete. That is where I say there is a room. We have two extreme school systems in India. One is the government, which has a very huge system and reaching out to a large number of poor people in rural and urban areas. Now, the other sector is the private sectors, which is also doing a very, very, very good job. But there is a huge gap in between this, and that is where we say there is a room for to do a meaningful role in this bridging the gap. Now, we started in 2004. I have to hurry, and I am a slow speaker. You have to bear with me, Professor James. Let me share with you my experience of working in the Northeast. I come from the Northeast, and what I want to do is, here you have a lot of players in this part of the country. In the Northeast, we don't have such a good players. And so I want to take this, all the good things and play out there. Share all these experiences with people who are doing tremendous job in the rural areas. I come from a conflict zone, which you all know. Northeast is highly conflict zone area. Every community is competing to hold the government in ransom. How many days you hold them, so you are known for that. So there is a lot of competition among communities. Now, when we started, I am being questioned. My point of sharing this issue is not to highlight, I don't want to project any community in a negative light. My point here is to highlight the situation that we are facing, that the children face. In the conflict since late 90s, a large number of villages were uprooted in the ethnic conflict between Nagas and Kukis, and many innocent women were killed, children left orphan, and the schools were destroyed, and the children were forced out of their schools. That is when we started our intervention. And when we started, I am from a Kuki community. When I work in the Naga areas, I am being questioned by both the communities. The Nagas suspect me as a conduit for Kuki militants, and the Kuki militants suspect me as, having some links with other groups. And that is the challenge. When we started, my team, some of my colleagues who are from this Naga community, when I invited them to my home and we stayed together, they were not able to have a very good night's sleep because they were scared. the same thing happened to me when I go to those areas. But today, we are able to, through these schools initiatives, we are able to rebuild this personal context and relationships. Now, in this tribal areas, in 2008, one of my colleagues was kidnapped, and a ransom was 1 lakh rupees was asked, and we managed paying some and release. Those are the challenges we are working with. And in these rural areas where there are no transports, there are no facilities, health facilities, in some of the cases, when our children were sick, they have to be carried by manpower. And before they reach the nearest district hospital, some of them die. And this is not only a militant infected area, but also malaria infected areas. There is no facilities. And these schools where we are running, they have no, library is a luxury, computer is a luxury, electricity is a luxury, good and clean, safe drinking water is a luxury. And you and I have clothes. Some of our students don't have even proper uniforms. I like to show you some of the photographs. When we started, we say uniforms, but that is not applicable. Slowly, they have only one cloth to wear the whole year. Then the question of uniform is out. And the question of, economy, the family economy, some of these students, when we started in this conflict zone, I remember a parent who came, her only position was a little pig. She brought that pig and requested our principal, you take this pig and give admission to my child. And there was no question of a school fee, admission fee, or tuitions, or books, or uniforms. Her only desire was to admit, and the school, the child should study. And when we look at the teachers in these areas where we operate, the population is thin, the villages were highly spread, and it's very difficult when the earlier speakers, when Sir Modi was speaking, he said financially viability. If I will to think of the financial viability option only, then I would not have started at all in some of these areas. And that is the challenge where we are working. But however, we are also looking at locating the schools in the cluster areas where some of the students can, the neighboring villages can come and study. However, this time I traveled because there was ban, and I took 8 hours to reach the farthest school where we are working. In these schools, some of the students are working 5 to 7 kilometers by foot to attend schools, and they have to cross rivers. I walk the bridge, a bamboo bridge, 2-3 bamboos put together, you walk that bridge. And during rainy seasons, they have to cross rivers. And the danger is very high. There is a lot of danger in that. And we have a long monsoon period in Northeast, from July to October. From July to October is a long monsoon period. So the absenteeism of students is very high during those periods. And small children cannot come to schools. Let's say 4 or 5 years old, they cannot walk such a distance. So those are the challenges where we are working. But looking at the RTE, as I say, I don't have a very good, for me, ignorance was a blessing. And I am scared when the RTE people will come and knock and ask me to close the schools. Comment on RTE is it's a very prescriptive, and it has not taken into account the rural geographical condition of the tribals. I'm talking about the mountain range from Nagpur to Tengnoupal in Manipur, the mountain. If you go to Mizoram, the school facility, playground is a luxury. And in some of the rural hill areas, you don't have those facilities. The prescription of professionally trained teachers, we are taking local peoples who are just 12 pass and building them up. So that helps us in keeping the cost and also reaching out to the community building. In a number of areas where tribals are living, the teachers are non-tribals. So when the non-tribals goes to tribal areas, language is different, attitude is different, so rapport building is very difficult. So we are working on using local people to have good rapport. And RTE, I'm really sorry to say this, RTE has no incentives for a school like us who are reaching out 100% to the weaker sections, and also a provision to support, but the provision is to close down. I'm really amazed with this act on this. We should be giving incentives.